Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first plenary lecture of this year's 14th Celtic Conference in Classics at the University of Coimbra. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce Professor Carmen Soares, who is Director of the Centre for Classical and Humanist Studies here at the University of Coimbra. Anton Paulo always thought it was very important to showcase the research of the host institution, if possible, at the Celtic Conference, and we've very often in the past had keynote speakers from the host, and it's a way of recognising the strengths of the host institution, giving the host the chance to present some of the types of research that they do, but it's also a way of recognising the huge contribution that the host institution makes to running the conference. And Carmen, as director of the centre here, has been the kingpin, the linchpin of the organisation for this conference and its predecessor in 2019, and we hope for all future Coimbra conferences too. And so it's very appropriate indeed that we can have Carmen present her research here this evening. Carmen is known for a large number of books and articles on ancient Greek history, especially Athenian history, ancient Greek literature, especially Herodotus, a certain amount about Euripides too, but she's also a crucial node in a network that takes in Portugal and many other countries too, that concerns itself with the culture and history of food and cooking. And so it's an aspect of that research that Carmen is going to present to us this evening, part of the work of her panel at the conference. And her title is Stay Healthy, Eat Comfort Food, the Role of Comfort Giving Food in Dietetic Greek Literature. Thanks very much.
Before I move on to my lecture, I would like to tell you how the CCC came into my life. I share this personal information because it helps to understand the beginning of a happy and already long institutional relationship between Coimbra Classical Studies and the scientific meeting that brings us together today. The first time a delegation from the Centre for Classical and Humanistic Studies ventured into the Celtic world of Northern Europe was in 2010. The Central Scientific Coordinator at the time, Professor Maria do Céu Fialho, and I attended the meeting organized in Edinburgh. At the time, we had no idea how the Cupid of knowledge would wound us for life. Fearless, I dared to introduce myself to the distinguished professor at the University of Rutgers, Thomas Figueira. Blessed was my boldness. Personally, I gained a great friend. Institutionally, we gained an excellent advisor for the Center for Classical and Humanistic Studies. 9 years later, on the occasion of the 12th CCC, we became partners of this magnificent organization. More than the scientific challenge, I reaped in that event the sweet fruit of the generous friendship of Anton Paulo and Douglas Cairns. I hope I will not disappoint the expectations of both. First of all, I would like to introduce you to the structure of my lecture. It is organized in 3 moments: the introduction, then the central topic, comfort-giving food in dietetic Greek literature, and finally, the conclusions. In the introduction, I have 2 sections, one for the theoretical framework, comfort food, the concept, and the second one on the research question and methodology. Then, in what concerns comfort-giving food, I will approach the topic in 3 different corpora: Corpus Hippocraticum, Plutarch's advice about keeping health, and finally, Gallen's dietetic works. The recent history of the pandemic caused by the coronavirus has had and continues to have a remarkable impact on our way of life, our dieta, to use the Greek term. The imposition of severe and prolonged restrictions on social distancing compromised and even diminished the functioning of the basic pillars of social well-being, such as family and friends. This situation reduces, in some cases significantly, the levels of emotional well-being of the world's population. In addition, difficulties in accessing basic goods and services, such as food and healthcare, have increased the vulnerability of people and states. Given these initial considerations, to some extent based on a common knowledge shared by all of us, I imagine that many of you may wonder what interest does it have for a discussion such as that proposed in the title of my conference to evoke today's history. I do so not only for the obvious reason that the issue I am dealing with is one that, in contexts of health crisis, is always on the agenda, whatever the historical time under analysis, the issue of health preservation, restoration. I do so also because of the relevance that this past-present dialogue has in the context of 2 recent trends in the study of social sciences and humanities. These trends have also been emerging in the fields of the classical and cultural studies on food stricto sensu. I am referring to what may be called the emotional turn and the heritage turn. My study is owed to these 2 terms. To the emotional turn, because it addresses the topic of food in classical sources from the perspective of the consumer's emotional response to what is eaten in what contexts, rather than opting for more conventional analysis of what is eaten, who eats, how food is prepared, and in what contexts it is eaten. And to the heritage turn, because it highlights the basic requirements of organizing a cultural good from the past as heritage, being alive, that is, continuing to have meaning and to be used in the present, even if necessarily altered by the changing historical context. The use of the heritage interpretative key is present twice in my reflection. In fact, the capacity of classical sources to speak to and about the present is clear both from an operational point of view, through my resorting to a theoretical framework established in other scientific domains, but valuable for classical studies, the concept of comfort food, and in terms of the results of the analysis, with the unveiling of similarities between the current meaning of comfort-giving food and its representation in ancient Greek sources. Especially in the last decade, several individual and collective works of reference on emotions in Greek and Roman antiquity have emerged. In particular, the seminal and synthesis works authored or edited by David Constant, Douglas Cairns and Damian Nellis, and Douglas Cairns, all of them testify to the vitality and timeliness of the emotional term among classicist scholars. Cairns' introductory text to A Cultural History of the Emotions in Antiquity, while drawing attention to the impossibility of working in different cultures and languages with a common and homogeneous terminology for the concept emotion, establishes an essential order regarding the vehicles of manifesting emotions. It is not only on individuals' faces, in their facial reactions, that emotions are expressed. Language and culture are also means of representing emotions. A third reason for introducing my reflection with reference to the pandemic context is that there is evidence, both empirical and scientific, that this context has contributed to a more pronounced and widespread perception of food as a way of feeling and giving comfort. I would highlight in this regard different documentary evidence that illustrates how states, NGOs, and scientists in social sciences and humanities address the way in which food, comfort, and health form an essential reflective triad in pandemic contexts. The report, Food in a Pandemic, explores people's experiences on COVID-19 to better understand how a new food environment created during the pandemic has impacted the public's behaviors and preferences. The study, supported by the Food Standards Agency and conducted during November 2020, while the UK was under various lockdown restrictions, points to an increase in the buying of locally produced food, to a complex shift in people's diets with more home cooking, and that people in the UK tend to have positive attitudes towards food, with 64% saying food was a source of comfort and 62 saying that it was synonymous with family time. The Family Dinner Project, Food, Fun and Conversation, is a non-profit initiative with over 20 years of research and social intervention, based on Boston's Massachusetts General Hospital Psychiatry Academy, which created a special offer of resources to get the very best out of meals in highly sociability limiting conditions. And I will mention the work they have done. The Pandemic 2020 resources, 2 examples, a virtual dinner party guide, and family dinner during quarantine. To conclude these thoughts on the relevance of the subject I bring to debate, I present a very enlightening example of how today, as in classic antiquity, we find books that aim to instruct a non-expert reader on how to have a healthy diet based on comfort-giving foods. Naturally, the emergence of this kind of discourse on the healthy consumption of comfort food should be understood as a response to the dominant tendency to consider such type of food and drink as unhealthy. I'm referring to the Liza Patrick's book, The Beginner's Guide to Preparing Healthy Comfort Food, Favorite Foods Made Healthy. As stated in the book's promotional summary, the main method for making healthy something that was not is to partially modify the recipes, not to eliminate them from the diet. We will see the same accommodation effort in my literary corpus of study. It's possible to give me light because I have difficult of reading this. I don't have here. Thank you very much. I'm myself making an effort. So, but great, thank you very much. Oh, much better. I feel another person. So, moving on, the theoretical framework. Only recently, from the mid-90s of the 20th century, the topic comfort food has started to gain ground among the most diverse media and scientific literature. A compulsory reading to understand the concept of comfort food is Charles Spence's recent review on that theme. As he begins explaining, the term comfort food refers to those foods whose consumption provides consolation or a feeling of well-being. Foods, in other words, that offer some sort of psychological, specifically emotional comfort. Notice that everyday foods, which from being so recurrent become banal, that is, without a special meaning for consumers, assume in contexts of deprivation caused by several reasons, including illness, they assume the character of comfort foods. It is mostly the sense of familiarity associated with these foods that makes consumers feel comforted when eating them. As these common foods bring back memories, evoking past experiences, in this case, happy ones, and rise emotions, it is important to perceive food not only as an emotional object, but also as a memorial object. In the 19th, in the field of sociology, several studies stress a similar need to analyze food from the perspective of emotions. As William Alex McIntosh noted, food eating, and I'm quoting, food eating and experience of the body all have emotional implications. In terms of the effects achieved, desired by the consumption of comfort-giving foods, studies on the subject are unanimous in pointing out the improvement of people's emotional and physical conditions following the transition from frailty situations to more positive psychosomatic states. Note that, as Stacey Wood observed, comfort in English is used both as a verb to comfort and as a noun, the comfort, the latter corresponding to, and I'm quoting, a condition or feeling of pleasurable ease, well-being, and contentment. The state of the art briefly presented allows us to conclude so far that comfort food is an operative concept involving a body and mind experience based on pillars of feeling comfortable, which result from a combination of familiarity and pleasure, evoking security, nostalgia, and enjoyment. Regarding classical studies in particular, the approach to food from the perspective of the theoretical framework of comfort food is very recent. After a study of my own, published in 2021, focusing on the Homeric poems, a discussion on the topic of comfort food in the Greek and Roman worlds is being held for the first time at this 14th Celtic Conference in Classics. My research intends to answer a specific need, namely to investigate the place of comfort-giving food in the general framework of prevention and cure through the Greek medical and philosophical literature dedicated to lifestyle, dieta, the so-called dietetic literature. To this end, a research question was raised. How do Greek medical and philosophical treatises on dietetics represent the consumer's emotional response to what is eaten? I worked with distinct corpora, Hippocrates, Plutarch, and Galen. produced over a period of time ranging from the 15th century before Christ to the 2nd century Anno Domini, in both the Greek and Roman worlds. The methodology I followed as my connection to the heritage term consisted in analyzing the text in the light of the modern concept of comfort food in order to verify whether the sources of the past speak to current thinking. I will then look at the results in 3 autonomous sections, reserving for the last section, the conclusions, the cross-reading of the results for the different corpora. The sense of comfort arising from the act of eating and drinking, as explained above, comes essentially from feelings of satisfaction, pleasure, and well-being experienced by the consumer. There is also a perception of comfort as a compensatory mechanism in context of deprivation and fragility that cause feelings opposite to comfort, distress and discomfort. The decline of health and illness, insofar as it implies, in the light of ancient medicine, changes in the balance of the whole that makes the state of health of each body, leads to a change of habits, distances the individual from what is familiar, thus generating strangeness or discomfort. Staying healthy or recovering from illness thus implies having lifestyles, DI, in which one feels comfort, in the first case, or seeks the gradual re-establishment of that state of well-being. Extracting this information from the corpus of tests under analysis is not an easy task, since none of the works proposed was to discuss the relationship between food, comfort, and health. The relationships between these 3 pillars can only be found between the lines of the main issues. The reduced occurrence of Greek terminology for comfort and pleasure associated with food and drink should be understood as evidence of the discrete treatment of the subject by the authors under analysis. Since the theme of pleasure, comfort, food is also connected to the references made to its opposites, discomfort, displeasure, and distress, in my study I also took into account the mentions of the opposite of the meaning of comfort food in order to better understand the concept itself. Among the vast universe of treatises collected under the authority of the physician Hippocrates, we find scattered and brief references to the importance given to the feeling of comfort and well-being resulting from the ingestion of food and drink. In the treatise Ancient Medicine, there is a definition of dieta that is particularly relevant for understanding the recognized legitimacy in medical discourse of the presence of pleasure and the satisfaction of what is craved in the regime of the healthy. I will not read all the quotation of the quotes, okay, so don't be scared, but they are there for you to follow. Note that this definition of lifestyle in health, while making it clear that health is a state in which enjoyment is unrestricted, implies that this scenario changes when there are disturbances to that state. In fact, while in the regime of healthy people, oi ugiai non tes, pleasure hedone prevails, and there are no limits to desires, epithumeusi. In other regimes, we can assume that pleasure is no longer the goal to be achieved, although this does not imply necessarily its elimination. Evidence of this secondary status is found in the few, mostly implicit allusions made in medical treatises to the importance of the pleasant taste and smell of food. This idea of some indulgence to pleasure in scenarios of sickness is reinforced by references made to other texts belonging to the corpus that mention the importance of the patient eating tasty and good-smelling food. Notice the reference to the need to prescribe tasty, pleasant food, idea that may be further implied in the contradiction of serving patients unpleasant, tasteless, flavorless dishes, and in the allusion to the good smell of certain food. Thus, in addition to taste, smell also stands out as a sense that stimulates to the appetite of patients. Thus, in aphorisms, it is made clear that between tastier, idion, so of less quality, and tasteless, aedes, but of higher quality food, the patient should be given the former. We perceive, however, from the disclaimer present in affections, that the concession made by physicians to, and I'm quoting, to the wishes of patients, that is, to their hedonic, cannot lead to the worsening of their weakened health condition. We shouldn't forget either that the good taste of food is a condition for health itself, as it facilitates digestion. This is shown by the following comment to the opposite state made in ancient medicine, 10.4, that food rather unpleasant causes indigestion. It is a fact that it is the habit of consuming certain foods that makes them consistent with the consumer's nature, whereby the familiar diet is the one that tastes good and guarantees health. In contrast, as we read in Regimen in Acute Diseases, and I'm reading all with the translation, the chief causes of diseases are the most violent changes in what concerns our constitutions and habits. Applying the contemporary hermeneutics of the concept comfort food, we can conclude that the usual and familiar food is considered tasty and a source of well-being when enjoying good health, and a source of comfort in situations of deprivation or fragility. From a medical point of view, the proper functioning of the digestive organs is a guarantee of the body's health, a state that derives from eating familiar foods, that is, comfort-giving food, and not from the powerful agata or bad, caca qualities they may have. And this is, you can find this reference in Regimen in Acute Diseases. But the key to understanding that pleasure is not a detriment to health and even boosts recovery lies in the observance of moderation. There is no doubt that pleasure, when in excess, is harmful and forbidden in the diet of the sick, and will not be equally beneficial in healthy diets. As Peter Singer has correctly pointed out, Plutarch's work falls within the then recent tradition of therapeutic philosophical writing. I will not go into detail today on the closeness between Plutarch's position and that expressed in Plato's texts, a subject I addressed last September in the Congress, Plutarch on Dieta, Well-being, Conviviality, Feeding, and Environment. I will simply recall the essentials of Platonic thought insofar as Plutarch's ethical approach, already designated by Leif von Hoff as diet ethics, is very much in depth to Plato's thought and is part of the mandatory framework for understanding his work. Regarding the role of food pleasure, Gorgias lets us see that, as in the Hippocratic treatises, it has a place
in the diets prescribed by physicians, pleasure as a place. In this passage, Plato discusses how to distinguish medicine from cooking. The former enables one to know what foods are best for the body, medicine. The art of cooking, on the contrary, does not concern itself with what is best, but aims always at the superlative degree of pleasure. That is, the cook's art is based on this condition of seeking pleasure without being concerned with the best. This being the defining element of cooking, this last idea. And at the same time, what distinguishes it from medicine. It is then deduced that the pursuit of pleasure, to edu, is also part of the medical discourse as long as it is accompanied by the pursuit of what is the best. Written after 81 AD, advice about keeping well, as target audience Plutarch's peers, and aimed to teaching them how to live healthily without rejecting pleasure from their diet in general and food and drink habits in particular. Plutarch's dietetics guidelines on how to stay healthy, eating comfort-giving foods and drinks, are very welcome by an elite of readers to whom the table, as a space for consumption and socializing, represented a status symbol, and food luxury, a social prestige that could not be entirely avoided. In fact, the teachings Plutarch gives on the wise management of excess and luxury at meals without compromising social etiquette are particularly well received by the members of high society to which his readers belonged. Plutarch stands out from the studied universe also by the fact that he is the only one to apply the term comfort, eupatheia, to food. He does so with regard to the food and drink most often quoted both in texts written by doctors and in literature that portrays and shapes the lifestyle of an educated and economically well-off elite. Meat and wine. Excessive consumption of these foods has made them responsible for compromising people's health, which is why Plutarch encourages the progressive reduction of sarcophagia, creophagia, meat consumption. To be effective, the catechization of those at whose tables meat was considered a status symbol par excellence must be anchored in the safeguarding of the much desired comfort, eupatheia, and enjoyment, apolosis. The class prejudice that Plutarch seeks to contradict, and to which the model of the Homeric heroes has greatly contributed with their constant meat-based feasts, is that only or mainly through the consumption of meat one gives comfort and pleasure to body and spirit. What the author argues, however, is that both products consumed au naturel and culinary knowledge make it possible to obtain the eupatheia and apolosis that were conventionally centered on sarcophagia. For the earth yields in abundance many things, not only for nourishment, but also for comfort and enjoyment, some of which it grants to our use just as they are with no trouble on our part, while others we may make savory by all sorts of combination and preparation. As for wine, it deserves special attention from Plutarch, raising it to the status of superfood, to use a currently fashionable classification, applied to foods that are beneficial, Greek ophelimos, both for their medicinal, nutritional, and gastronomic value. Mixed in a balanced way with water and consumed at the right time, pros ton chiron, wine exhibits in superlative degree the qualities of being pleasant, ediston, and non-sickening, asict kotaton. There is therefore no doubt about its status as a health-promoting comfort food. This value is, however, threatened when its consumption does not obey to the principle of moderation. Then wine becomes unhealthy. We all know that, of course. We didn't need Plutarch to tell us, but anyway. But Plutarch knows that his task is to change the dominant mentality among those to whom his work is addressed. Regarding the consumption of wine, Plutarch endows the misunderstanding of taking comfort, eupatheia, and life of pleasures, edupatheia, as synonymous. While the latter implies living exclusively for pleasure, pat, edu, comfort means living morally well, pat, pat, which involves a balance between pleasure and pain. Okay. Plutarch takes a fresh look at the decisive role that pleasure plays in maintaining health and feeding the sick, stressing the importance that synetheia habit has in the perception of what is pleasant. Plutarch proposes that his readers should adopt, when enjoying health, a program of accustoming themselves on occasion, from time to time, to the dietary regime characteristic of the disease conditions. This way, they manage to make the typical diet of patients agreeable, familiar, and congenial to their nature. The author even points out what are the essential steps to take to have a healthy preventive diet. Water drinking, what we are doing all these days, eat little, and eliminate any excess waste from the body. So, synetheia has the power to lead to the transformation of the body's perception of pleasure. That is, just as it receives with a sense of displeasure all that is unknown to it, it also receives with fondness what it has become accustomed to consuming. In short, pleasure is not conceived as an object external to the individual, a concrete reality that it desires, for instance, a refined delicacy or a good wine, but rather an internal experience which each individual experiences himself. Plutarch takes a conciliatory position. That is, he teaches how to suppress or at least reduce the unpleasantness of the diet of the sick, thanks to the education of the taste for habit, and gives guidance to his peers not only on how to make the diet in times of health even healthier, but also on how to stay healthy without renouncing the non-risky and disease-causing behaviors. The prevailing high society social code dictated that one should eat and drink to society and enjoy experiences of pleasure, edupatheia. What Plutarch teaches is that these behaviors should only be avoided when the potential health risks are unknown. The first strategy the author suggests is to be applied to contexts in which a person knows in advance that he or she is going to attend a feast. In this case, the advice is to deprive the body of sustenance in the time leading up to the festive gathering, thereby creating an effective need for food. This proposal for preventive abstinence makes it possible to include in a healthy diet the enjoyment of the great delights of the table, namely elaborate dishes, pastry, and strong drink. Because it was necessity, stimulated by deprivation, that determined the appetite for these delicacies, there is a place for all of them in the diet of those who enjoy health without failing ill. Once again, the philosopher is demonstrating how to stay healthy by eating comfort-giving food and drink. In what concerns the vast textual universe of Galen, an author that lived about a generation after Plutarch, my analysis focused essentially on his work, Ta Hygiena, Health, precisely the treatise that establishes a genre within medical literature, the genre of the preservation of health and the promotion of a healthy way of life. I also resort to the treatise on the properties of foodstuff because it is a test with an applied dimension of dietetics, and in it the emotional role of food, generator of pleasure and consequently of comfort, is commented on in a natural way. These two works are indeed complementary in the answer they give to my research question. In the first, we find doctrine on the medical concept of health, and as far as our analysis is concerned, the prescription of appropriate diets for different states of being healthy, and how to recover from certain diseases through food or food-based medication. In the second, a book with the aim of providing a catalogue of properties and medicinal uses of the various foods that are part of both the healthy tables when one is in good health and the therapeutic tables when one is ill. References to the good or bad taste of what is eaten are inevitable. The principle that compels this is structural to ancient medical thought, as we have already underlined in the section dedicated to the Corpus Hippocraticum, a principle that can be translated in the popular expression, what tastes good does good. As with Plutarch's that when the Sanitate Praecepta, health is also a work that addresses to a lay target audience, explicitly defined by the term philiatroi, literally medicine lovers. Moreover, it develops a philosophical proposal on the meaning of open and inclusive health, insofar as it presents health as a commodity accessible to various socioeconomic profiles, defending that there is a health scale with an optimal version, the good condition, at the top, followed at equal distances by stable health and unstable health. Is, in fact, as Galen himself emphasizes, a disruptive proposal in relation to his medical peers. To sum it up, besides this general variation of health states, there's a large understanding of what is health, because this is a matter related to, okay, I lost my number pages, okay. Oh, okay, here. Okay, sorry, this happens sometime when we lost our pages. Oh my God, sorry. I'm seeing perfectly, but I'm losing my papers.
Delay, okay. Now, okay. Okay. Now I found it. Okay, perfect. So, continuing. However, only the elite have the leisure necessary to manage one's time and carry out the practices required for optimal health. The treatise has a highly practical didactic character, since it teaches how to maintain health, presenting 4 classes of material to do it. My analysis is focused on one of the things taken, more specifically food and drink. Let us see then how the articulation of the 3 elements of food, comfort, and health is expressed in both treatises. The definition of health we have here, by stating its opposite, leaves implicit the definition of what it is. In other words, health is defined by the absence of suffering. The reflection concerning the diet of babies is in line with this reasoning. In this passage, the other one I will not share with you now, Galen establishes a cause-effect correspondence between food deficiency, distress, lupe, and discomfort, ania, both situations of health risk because they provoke in the body and consequently in the soul an imbalanced motion. As we have seen in the 2 previous items, Galen's principle that the pleasure of taste provided by tasty foods, drinks, and medical preparations benefits health is highlighted. It remains the idea that eating comfort-giving food helps one to be healthy or to recover from illness. On its own or associated with health benefits, pleasure is a sensory effect considered in the medical information given on the consumption of various foods. Since the treatise on the properties of foodstuffs converges with health, I will proceed to a joint analysis of the 2. Both the Corpus Hippocraticum and Plato's reflection on the distinction between medicine and cookery have clarified an aspect that Galen also mentions. The moderate role played by hedone in the dieta of health, maintenance, and recovery. We are aware of this in the Alimentorum Facultativus, and I'm quoting only the translation. For we physicians aim at benefits from foods, not at pleasure, but since the unpleasantness of some foods contributes largely to poor concoction, in this regard it is better that they are moderately tasty. The decision on what food to eat, if there is a wide choice available, must obey the 2 criteria of benefit and pleasure, as we read about whether a patient can eat apples, pears, or pomegranates. The person should himself try each one in turn and proceed to use whichever he finds least harmful and most pleasant. The emphasis on the role of pleasure as a driver of consumption is recurrent, although it remains at moderate levels, as can be seen from the clarification provided on the use of sweet honey in the composition of drugs. The drug should be as pleasant as is possible, while preserving its beneficial capacity. I do not, of course, suggest that one reduce this in one's quest for pleasure. And now the conclusions. The main conclusion to be drawn from the cross-analysis of our sources is that food, both for the healthy and the sick,
is not seen by doctors and wellness thinkers as just a means of obtaining energy, a means of replacing energy losses. There is always an emotional experience associated with consumption on the part of who eats. What is ingested tastes or smells good, causing in the consumer a sensation of pleasure, satisfaction, or in other words, comfort. The main reason for healthy eating, relying on ingesting foods and drinks that please and are therefore considered tasty and smelly, causing the individual to feel a sense of satisfaction, comfort, lies in the structural principle of ancient medicine thinking that the body digests well what tastes well, with the proper functioning of the digestive organs being the main evidence of health. In the case of more technical medical dietary texts, the reference to comfort-giving food is more subtle. But when the work has an ethical, philosophical, didactic purpose, intended to teach members of a cultured and wealthy elite to intelligently manage the excess of luxury at meals, without compromising social etiquette, as in the case of Plutarch's work, then the theme of comfort food as a means of providing healthy pleasure is addressed more directly and insistently. In other words, the target audience seems to have conditioned the prominence given to the theme in the different texts. Given the social agenda that underlies Plutarch's recommendations, we can infer that the comfort provided by his teachings in terms of diet is not restricted to the well-being of the body, but aims to ensure simultaneously the social well-being. In conclusion, the main originality of Plutarch's proposal in terms of the application of the interpretive framework of comfort food in relation to the other authors analyzed lies precisely in the fact that it harmonizes the comfort of the body with social comfort. Physical and social health are inseparable conditions. Now, briefly, the slides, some selected bibliography, the sources I've been using to prepare this presentation. And finally, muito obrigada. Thank you very much.